what we're going to look at here is how we start viewing student work, how we assess it, mark it, and start giving feedback to the students as well. Now I'm going to show you one way of starting to do that, then I'm going to show you a slightly alternative view as well, which I think is a bit slicker and a bit easier. But we can access their work by going into the team that we've got. So this test team here is the one we've been using, and then you can find your assignment. So there's got one there in the general channel, and then I've got my architecture assignment in there that I could look at as well. And I could just go into these and start loading that up. However, I find it much easier actually to start using the assignments tab down the side here. This will show you all of the classes that you've got, and then you just find the one that you're interested in. So if I jump into there, it's going to show me those two assignments that are currently sort of waiting to be graded and marked. So they're kind of live assignments at the moment. It also shows you the ones that you've completed and the ones that you just haven't set yet as well in there. Now, one of the really good things about this, I think, is that by just clicking on test class at the top, I can change the class that I'm looking at. So it's this kind of one-stop place that you can do all of that assessment for. So you've got several different groups that you're kind of working on marking. It's much easier, I find, than jumping between all the different teams, but it gets you to the same thing essentially. Now I've got two assignments I'm going to look at here and how we can view that and give feedback to that. I'm going to pick the simpler one first, which is this general knowledge quiz, which, if you remember, was just made using a form, and it was partially self-marking, this one. Now I set this up with some example students, and only one of them has done it, so I've only come in here and completed that with one of those students. It's worth pointing here, or pointing out rather here, that they've got 0 out of 2 so far. Now just be mindful of the type of quiz that you've set, and if you've set one which is not totally fully marking, or self-marking rather, or not self-marking at all, it will still say 0 there until you've gone in and sort of marked it yourself, which actually for some students is a little bit sort of puts them off a little bit actually, and they think they've done very poorly when actually you just haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So it's worth mentioning that to students, I've found at least, that don't take the grade straight away. But anyway, we can look at what they've written by clicking on it here, and this will load up their responses to it. So what we need to do here is just go through. The top one has been auto-graded, as it says, and they didn't get that right. This one here is highlighted as needs review, and we'd go there, get 0. You can put more, but it tells you that you're giving them extra credit, which is a very American thing, I think, but we'll put that in there. Now what you can do here is provide feedback if you wanted, either to the whole thing or question by question, specific feedback in there if you wanted to. It hasn't highlighted here, but what you can do is once you load one student up, you'll get that review next going. Now that hasn't highlighted for me because only one student has completed it. Okay, but typically you'll be able to click that review next, and just quickly go through all the different students that you have to mark or have to review the answers they've got. So that's pretty straightforward in terms of what you can do there. If I jump back into my assignments though, the more complicated one to look at is this more typical kind of assignment. If we have a look at what the student's done here, where they've turned it in, what loads up is the document that I shared with that. So that's the one I gave a copy to every different student, and I've gone here and I've just written some nonsense into this. But I want to point out a few different ways in which you can start marking this and adding feedback and so on. Now I think the most obvious ones are on the right hand panel, where you can give it an overall mark, whatever it might be, and you can type in some feedback into here, whatever it might be. And that works perfectly well, but there are other things which are worth pointing out, I think, and other sort of techniques that I found useful when trying to give feedback. So if we start looking at this document here, we can start adding feedback more directly onto here, which maybe not with this kind of document that I've set up here, but if you were doing things like a longer piece of writing maybe, so a long essay sort of style they might be doing. Or I find this really useful if I'm looking through something like a student's personal statement, maybe something like that, where you want to start adding comments and suggestions and sort of alterations they might make, that it becomes really useful. Now, by default, this is set to edit this document. So if I change this and I went and I took that out, that's gone for both me and for the student as well. Now you may want that, you may want to take stuff out, or in the case of what I do here, I would put in marks into the little specific boxes that I had there. Okay, and that's an edit to the document. What you can do though is change this into a different or a set of different modes. So viewing is, as you suggest, you can look at it, but you make no changes to it whatsoever. So that I find not particularly useful. It's very rare that I'd want to change it to that actually. But what I do find really useful is this reviewing stage instead, or the sort of in-between stage. Now what I can do is I can make suggestions here. So if I wanted to put in here, notice how it's highlighted that as not sort of set in stone now, but it is a suggestion, and the owner of this document, so the student that wrote this, will then be able to sort of accept or reject those suggestions that I've made. So that I find really useful, like I said, for those longer pieces of writing particularly. What you can also do is you can start adding in specific comments. So if I wanted to say, look, actually, the way they've answered this question, or you might highlight a whole paragraph or a section of work or whatever it might be, and you just add a comment. And here we can start adding comments in saying, whatever it might be. And you can notice here, it'll sort of highlight that down the side of the document. So if they click on these little sort of speech bubbles, it will then show that comment that's relevant to that. And this I found really useful for things like long pieces of coursework, particularly in kind of vocational style courses where they have to sometimes write quite large projects. And then you can get a sort of conversational thing going about different sections here, because they could reply to that, you could then send another reply backwards and forwards really quite easily in a document. So I found that very, very useful in terms of that. Either way though, once you're totally happy with what you've written on here and the marks you give them, then you can just return that to that student, and that will then ping up to them saying this piece of work has been marked and here is the grade and so on that they get for that. So I'm going to go ahead and return that, and then what we'll do in a separate sort of video is have a look at what that shows up like to a student.